Good morning, everyone. This is Give Black, Give Back. This series is about the collective strength of Black giving in the Black community. I'm Lisa Swift-Young, and I'm joined by one of our board members, Eric Brown Jr., for the Give Back, Give Black Collaborative, and it's part of the Community Foundation, Middle Tennessee Community Foundation. And this is our second Juneteenth Philanthropy Month conversation. We started this about a year ago, so if you've been following us, you're probably gotten a lot of really good information. And so today will be no different with our panel. But if this is your first time ever seeing us, welcome. Just so you know that Give Black, Give Back's mission is a threefold mission. We serve as a resource to amplify Black-led funds in the community. We also support the efforts of nonprofits that are run by Blacks, as well as in the Black community. And we also provide education and community on how to sustain philanthropy through our economy. So if you want to find out more about what we do and the stories that have already been posted, go to blackgivingback.com. I also want to remind you that Black Give Back is an opportunity to honor and celebrate the collective giving of Black individuals, foundations, and businesses who make their business to support the Black community through financial contributions, time, talent, or treasures. And in this case, also testimony. We are celebrating the conversations, and we're going to talk today specifically with our religious community specifically. And so we have on our panel today, we have Pastor John Faison, who is a senior pastor at Watson Grove Baptist Church. We also have Reverend Dr. Judy D. Cummings, who is a senior pastor at New Covenant Christian Church. We have Reverend Olivia McCloud, who is the associate editor at R.H. Boyd Publishing Corporation. And last but definitely not least, Pastor Davie Tucker Jr. at the pastor of Beach Creek Baptist Church. So we first of all want to thank our panelists for being here today to have this great conversation about Black philanthropy and as it relates to the church. My co-host, Eric Brown, is going to throw out the first question to Pastor Faison, and I'll let him go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa. Definitely appreciate that. Pastor Faison, we're going to go ahead and start with you. I guess I'll start off with this comment that religious commitment yields philanthropic sharing. That's well established in a lot of research, and both religious attendance and charitable giving are currently in decline. How is your church adapting to a lot of the changes that are happening right now?
Eric, great question. I think a philosophy of giving for us, our approach is to describe it as a philosophy of life. So much of our external activity is often compartmentalized when it comes to our faith. So there's our faith in Christ, there is our connection to God that is so deep, but then often there are no repercussions on the practical implications of what that means. Our approach is to make sure we understand that the stewardship of life is comprehensive, that I'm not just responsible for the stewardship of my words and my soul, but I'm also responsible for the stewardship of my resources. And when I understand that everything that I have, and of course, in our context, in our faith perspective, comes from God, then I'm not an owner. I'm a manager. I'm a steward, and so I must then manage well whatever God has placed in my hands. And one of the ways that I manage well is to use those resources to make impact, to make sure that those things, those gifts, those talents, those treasures, and even my time, everything is a piece to be managed in order to make impact in the world. That's how transformation takes place, that God gives to those that God trusts, and then God trusts us to share those to make an impact in the world. So I think communicating that message, not necessarily the practical implications of it, but the philosophy behind it, helps to shape how persons respond differently. While giving is on a decline, serving is not on decline. Serving is on increase. So helping people understand the comprehensive nature of stewardship, understands that maybe you don't have a bunch of treasure, but you've got an amazing talent that you can give. Maybe you don't have a particular talent, but you've got time that you can invest. And so seeing the comprehensive nature of the philosophy of stewardship helps us understand we always have something to give, even when we think we don't.
That's a great transition to our next question. I'll go ahead and let Lisa take us there.
Yeah, so it was a really great transition because we were talking about specifically that. Also, you are correct that maybe giving is down, but a lot of people now in the past 5 to 10 years, there's been a considerable amount of activity around Christianity, like in the name of Christ specifically. So do you think that now there is a shift in giving where it's shifting more about deeds, time, and talents than it is about treasures and dollars? Is that what you're seeing?
I think so, and I think that's the case because you have a new generation that is emerging. Younger generations don't have a lot of access to resource and capital. It's just kind of the life cycle. You're not fully established yet, but they do understand principles, and they do understand that they want to see impact in the world. They are not satisfied with just intellectual assent to a particular principle. They want to see that principle enacted. Engaged. They want to be involved in it. I don't want to just hear what Jesus has to say about me. I want to hear it, then I want to practice it and exercise it in the world. And so I think with a younger generation rising, you see a greater emphasis on philanthropic service as opposed to philanthropic giving, simply because they don't have the resources, but they do have the energy and the time and the intellect and the creativity and the innovation. So they're giving in different ways, which I think will ultimately turn into, as they grow and as they develop and get more settled financially in life, I think we'll see that translation into their giving, because again, it's not compartmentalized. They see it as one. They see it as all connected. So it's the philosophy, not just the practice. I think there is a greater responsibility, and so the church then has to create, I believe, pockets and places where that increased willingness to serve and be involved can be leveraged and maximized. We've got a generation who is not interested in ushering. We got a generation who cares nothing about necessarily singing in a choir. But we've got a generation who will show up to feed the hungry. We got a generation who will go out into the streets and march and protest against injustice. We have a generation who will engage in leveraging resources, time, and creativity, and even skill set, technological prowess and acumen to make sure that certain ideals are expressed and to make sure that certain efforts get accomplished. COVID-19 was a perfect example of this. We saw at our church, we normally have a food pantry all the time, but we ended up doing it every week in 2020. And folks showed up. I mean, in mass. We had to turn people away in terms of people who would serve. There was even this effort to give and to donate. People see needs and they respond to them. And I think as the church, we've got to create spaces and opportunities to leverage that capacity.
I think that was very eloquently put from that standpoint, and really looking at how philanthropy is changing and how we sort of embrace that. I'm going to go to Reverend Dr. Judy Cummings for the next question, and just ask specifically, what do you see the difference between worldly philanthropy, which is giving to organizations outside of the church, and then also Christian philanthropy, and how do people how does that look to you?
Thank you, and that's a great question, and I appreciate everything that Dr. Faison has just said, particularly around the issue of our philosophy and our practices. As it relates to the difference between worldly philanthropy and Christian philanthropy, I think that both give out of perspective of giving through their beliefs, right? So we live out our beliefs through our giving. And so that you have in common. But I think that what makes the difference is in Christianity, there is the theology of giving that we land with, that is our foundation. In the Hebrew scriptures, it talks about, refers to tzedakah, and tzedakah literally means justice. And so it is a commandment a moral obligation to give to the poor. And so I think that that also separates the secular from the religious, that there is a moral obligation. So it's not that I give so that I can feel good, but I give because I'm morally obligated, and it is a matter of justice for my giving. There's also in the ancient text another phrase, tikkun olam, and basically that refers to repairing the world. And when you think about Christianity and you think about the beliefs that we have in terms of giving, when we think about a God that we serve who has given us so much, that we give, I think that Dr. Faison commented about it out of a sense of stewardship, but it's stewardship to do that reparative work, to repair the world. In Christian tradition, we talk about giving for us is a key practice, right? And many Christians, we still look toward the Hebrew Bible to even talk about the tithe. Now, there are some people who don't talk about the tithe anymore, but just what we've been describing already, our time, our talent, our treasure, whether you have the treasure or the time or the talent, you're still giving back. But again, I think that the difference is that moral obligation and the place that we give from our sense of belief and values.
Thank you very much. Eric, do you have a follow-up question to
Yeah,
Reverend?
absolutely, because Dr. Cummings, you hit on a lot of stuff, so I'm gonna take it this way. We definitely know that the church has been, and still in some cases is, a place or arena for social, political, civic, and philanthropic action. I guess my question for you is, where could the churches, and I'm gonna keep it localized, the churches in Nashville, where do you think they could use more of their talents to really uphold this legacy of giving if they're not doing that?
Yeah, so, it's a mindset change too, right? We all, grew up in the church where you got that quarter where you take it to Sunday school to give. But to begin to think about, as we organize people, we have the people, that we need to be able to organize money so that we can have the political power to make the change that our people are so desperately in need of, to create those substantial changes that we march for, those changes that we desire, that will give us that quality of life, that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that we're all looking forward to. So I think that now is the time, and coming out of COVID, coming out of a year of reflection, is a good time to begin to think about and to change a mindset about why we give, what we're giving to, and what we're doing with the funds that we give. So yes, young people will give, but they want to have impact, but they also want to have transparency. And I think that that's something too that the church is going to have to pivot toward, and be more transparent about where the funds are actually going and how we're actually helping. I saw coming into COVID, right after the tornado, we opened a disaster relief center, and we serve right there in 37208 zip code, the most incarcerated zip code in the nation. We saw people not just from the church, but people from the community, those who had needs, who came to serve. So they didn't have a lot of treasure to give, but they trusted the church enough to come and to give of their time and to serve. And so I think that there are some mindsets that just have to, mindsets and philosophies that just have to be broken down and built back up to say, okay, this is where change is needed in terms of how we give and how we steward that which has been entrusted to us.
Thank you for that. And I'm gonna throw it out to everybody else. Pastor Faison, I know you're limited on time, so I definitely want to make sure that you have a chance to answer this. Particularly, Dr. Cummings, I love where you went with that, especially in Nashville, where we've experienced the tornado and the pandemic as well. So I definitely want to throw out those questions to you, Reverend Cloud, to you, Pastor Tucker, and as well as to you, Pastor Faison.
Well, I think Dr. Cummings brought up a very valid point about transparency in the church. And I think people give, whether in or out of the church, they give to what they believe in. I'm also president of a Black Women's Foundation and a member of another foundation that's focused on women of color. And people give to what they believe in. We had one of our ministries at Berean to help women at the Family Life Center and Hope Center. Normally we give them gift cards. Well, this year we decided to double the amount that we give them in the middle of the pandemic, and people were down with it. They gave because they believe in what's being done. They see what's being done. They get feedback about where their money is going. They see it, they believe in it. So I think that transparency and accountability and credibility are all important factors, because when your money is tight, you don't have any extra money for somebody to be fooling around with your dollars. You know, if you got a little extra, you might give them a pass, but it's like, I work hard for this money. So don't be going to the Bahamas on my dime, you know, or whatever you're doing. So I think as long as we're honest with people, and whatever our belief system is, we give to what we believe in, whether it's because we believe the Bible and what the Bible says, or what we've been taught in church, or whether we believe in a cause and what it stands for. We give to what we believe in. And I think we got to stand on that and let people see where the dollars are going.
I agree 100% with Dr. Cummings and Pastor Cloud. The transparency piece is vital. Again, dealing with a younger generation that has more access, more exposure, that I hate to say it this way, but can spot a scam a mile away, can sniff out fakeness and superficiality without a lot of words, just watching, just paying attention. They live in a world filled with fakeness. Social media is all about imagery and not integrity. And so they swim in that world. So they know it when they see it. But because they swim in that world, they also know authenticity when they see that. And one of the ways that I believe helps to foster this idea of trust and transparency is storytelling. It's about telling the story of the impact that giving makes, telling the story of the impact that serving makes. Black churches are not always great at this. We're great at doing the work. We get the work done, but we often are so busy and buried in the routine and the regimen of getting it done, that we don't pause to tell the story of the impacts that were made. We don't pause to take the interviews. We don't pause to do the stories. We don't pause to have the conversations about the impact that was made. We don't pause to evaluate the effectiveness of particular efforts and to examine, okay, we did it. This is what we accomplished. How do you know what success is if you never measure it, right? You got to evaluate and then tell the story. As you tell the story, folks who are attracted, maybe not to your church, but attracted to your story will show up. And what we've learned as a Black church in South Nashville is that some of our greatest givers will never enter the sanctuary, but they hear the story of impact and they give from that space. So I would challenge Black churches to not only see the Black church as the space where your giving comes from, but see the Black church as the impetus of impact. And when you make the impact and tell the story, givers come to you. And they may not look like you. They may not live in your state. They may not live in your city. They might not even vote like you. But if the story makes an impact, God moves on the hearts of people and they give.
Dr. Tucker, you have anything to add?
Well, I definitely appreciate the invitation. And I can't say that I disagree with all that I have heard. For me, I'm guided by a statement that we use in our church. It's not your giving, it's your living. And as I extrapolate that out, it basically means just that. For the people of God, it's your living. And that everything that's born out of that will also include your giving. When people understand what it means to have a life in Christ, certain things just become automatic. I pastor a small church, and I'm blessed with the congregation in that some of the national trends within congregations has not been our has not been our lot. Our giving actually grew during the last year. And I don't make appeals. I don't beg. Again, I think it gets back to the transparency. I believe that when a life becomes better, the church, when gathered, is automatically better. I go so far as to say that if a person only gives in church, you're missing the point. That God does not hold us accountable for what we don't have. But as Dr. Faison started, God does hold us accountable for how we handle all those things, which is inclusive of our time. Actually, in my teaching around stewardship, money is the very, very last thing that I even start to talk about. Because again, if you're living a certain way and you want to attach that to the God of everything, then giving and how you show up in the world, oftentimes you're giving in that space or what is important for you. And that goes against a lot of the modern day ideologies that are, I think, the cause of the church becoming less and less relevant to folks' life when you have individuals who are not transparent. We shame people. We make people think that this is whatever, when if you back all the way up again, the idea of scarcity is a problem of humanity. And so again, it's how we show up every day that makes it automatic about what we do with this life that we've been blessed with. So for me, it's an intentionality that doesn't allow, even for me, the separation of the secular and the spiritual. My Africanness won't let that be split. I mean, even my theology, we are capable of some of the greatest expressions of compassion to each other. And likewise, in that same body, in that same mind, around that same spirit, we're also equally capable of such egregious behavior to each other. And that's just a lot of it. That's just a lot. So when one tries to separate it from me, that's when it becomes problematic for me. It's the same.
That's a great point. That's an amazing point. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I can touch my mute again, or I can keep talking.
Oh, no, you're good. We're good. We want all of your thoughts from that standpoint. You brought up a really interesting point. And one of the things in particular is there was a recent study that talked about like $9 out of every $10 that African Americans give, they give to churches or other religious institutions. While this doesn't compare to Caucasians or white Americans, they give about 75% of their donations to religious groups. Now, I want to, obviously address the issue that, we have the Black wealth gap. And so we're not talking about equal giving, we're talking about but greater sacrifice, right? So, I think to the point is that, Reverend Cloud mentioned, it's like, you might not have but a few dollars, but if you're giving of the money you can give, you're giving to the Black church specifically, then there's a greater sacrifice. As we've, been taught in the Bible, that's really what is the sacrifice that you're doing. So how do you manage this greater responsibility? Because people are coming to say that the money that they have to give, they're giving to the church. So that sort of it feels like it maybe people are looking for you to do everything. So how do you manage that? Reverend Cloud.
Again, I think it has to do with value, perceived value in giving. For me, it's no different than buying a garment. What value do I see in buying this? Not because it's a label, but because its quality is going to fit what my needs. It's going to do whatever, anything that I invest my money in. And I think it's really not really that much different in the church. We give, and you got to look at the spiritual maturity, I'll say, of the giver. People are at different levels in the church, just like people are in different levels everywhere. So you got the giver who believes in giving because, you know, the promises that come with that, of the obligation that comes with that. I know people who give because they scared God's going to zap them with lightning if they don't, you know, and I'm not speaking to the validity. I'm just saying sometimes where people's heads are. So again, we have to show people, I think, in the church where their money's going, and what we're doing with it, so that they see value in where their dollars are being invested. And just because we're the church, we don't get a pass to say, you know, now why I individually believe if I give my money that, you know, if you don't do it right, that's on you, you know. But at the same time, I'm not going to keep giving my money to someplace I know it's not being used for the purposes that God intended. But we have to be accountable to people. But when you were talking also, it made me think about the old the burial societies that we used to have as Black people. We had to pull our little dollars together to help each other because nobody else was going to do it, you know. And now we have some other options out there, but it's still us, you know, it's still us helping us, and we have to see the value in us helping us. And I think that starts with our leadership being the kind of leaders that are being just and fair and honest and responsible with what we give, whether it's time, talent, or money. Yeah, any of that, because I know people their time has been abused by the church. You know, their love for the church has been abused. So we just have to be accountable in all those areas.
Eric, do you have a follow-up question to that?
I do. I do actually. Thank you, Reverend Cloud, for that. I'm going to start with you, but then I would love to hear everybody else's example of this question based on kind of what you just said, because you've given different examples of what giving looks like within the community. And I also think about how churches have been, you know, very involved in even thinking about our historically Black colleges, universities, hospitals, thinking about Temple and Second Harvest in that way. So I want to start with this question, which is, what is your definition of church, and how does giving fit within that for what you do?
Yeah, my definition of church is a body of believers who fellowship together, who are bonded by many things in the arena of faith. You know, so, and that's why people connect with different churches. The church that works for me does not necessarily work for another person. And I have people who say, well, you know, well, what do I need to go to church for? And for me, I tell them the benefits that I received, the fellowship, the love. I said, you know, when I had surgery, my church was there for me. You know, when somebody else has a thing going on, the church is there for them. So the ways that we show love to each other, the way we fellowship with each other. I was on a Zoom with another church, and I love the way they connected with each other. Hey, I'm glad to see you, because they have that connection of purpose. And so I think that churches have different purposes and different ministries they focus on. So I think it's what the person connects to. But for me, it's that faith community that we share those beliefs, but we also share bonds of caring for one another and caring for the community as well.
And I pass that question to either of you two as well.
Pastor Tucker, I would love to hear your sort of feedback on what do you see that the difference between, well, how do you define church?
Church for me is this gathered community. And there's certain parts of that we take with us. So it's this dynamic organism that for me is inclusive of all of humanity, to where even before folks claim it, the church seeks to claim them. And so again, for me, it gets back to, if we can be part of the transformative process in a family, in a home, in a life, then the church is better. But the church wrestles with our effort to count everything. You know, we want to count members, we count our money, we want to count everything. And oftentimes we miss the impact that we can make that sometimes you never even hear about, you never even talk about. So for me, the church has to be more of a thermostat in society over against that thermometer thing. And that becomes problematic. That becomes problematic. And it becomes problematic, even with some of the conversations and the political rhetoric that we see. And people pick churches based on their ideas around race, around society, around how they view women, or how they view sexuality. And all of these bifurcations, I think, again, have to do with the decreasing relevancy of the church in the life of humanity. We make room for those things that we like, and we tend not to make room for those things that we don't like. But the kingdom of God for me is a both and that even stretches me. I mean, that pushes me beyond my own places of comfort. But but it's never this closed place, because we all have to live in this world. And so what are we doing to make it better, not only for me, but for everyone? And so that becomes the struggle. Even when we talk about giving, Black folk have more of this Ubuntu, I am because you are, and you are because I am, which to me fits that Old Testament piece that Dr. Cummings is talking about, that gets at that tribalness, that if we're not careful, religion suddenly allows me to praise God for my possessions, when if someone else is hungry and I'm not, God has been favorable to me and not favorable to them. I think all that becomes problematic. So for me, again, it gets back to, it's not my giving, it's my living. What do I live for? If I can't live for something bigger than me, that has an impact beyond me, I don't know. I just question the God, because, even using that scripture we use all the time, John 3:16, we read it in a single sense when it's plural. For God so loved the world, not you. Not you. I mean, that is a distinction, that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever, not who you pick, not who you decide. And I think that that's where we miss our strength, is in the world and the whosoever. And so, yes, it pushes us. It creates its own conundrums. It does all of that. But I just believe that Black folks do a good job, because, we've always taken in everybody. We would not have made it if it had not been for our sharing, our giving, our trying to sustain each other. I grew up over in 37208 in Cheatham, and this was in the time of go over to Miss Mary's and get a cup of sugar. Go ask Miss Gwendolyn if she got 4 eggs. And we did that. I mean, we did that. And so how do we continue that? Because that's how we made it. Because again, this idea of having to, for me, this idea of philanthropy, I even moved away from this. Every church has had the benevolence committee. You cannot give, in my sense, as a child of God, and retain your power. And that's what charity and benevolence for me. And so often some of our philanthropic efforts, the folks who give, they retain their power. But giving requires that you depower yourself, and you'll find that you'll give in places that you don't even understand. So for me, that that giving and the retention of your power I just push back on that. Even some money in church is not good money. Some folks don't give because I won't blow their whistle. Some folks don't give because you won't name a bench after them, or at least mention it from the pulpit. Because I made a commitment with the church when I took the church. I'm gonna deal with whatever you put in that tray. And that's just what that is. And at the end of it, for me, I'm allowed to keep my integrity intact, and I can model in front of them in a way that when my time is up, I don't want to have any regrets.
I always love to hear Pastor Tucker, speak on any issue. For me, and allow me to make a correction. I am the retired pastor of New Covenant Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. Hallelujah. For me, church, the ecclesia, place of the gathered of the believers in Jesus Christ ends there. That belief in Jesus Christ has been, and the teachings of Christ are open to interpretation by so many that church really has no one definition now. Church for me is a place of struggle. It is a place where we come to struggle together. Everything that Pastor Cloud said about it being a place of love and a place of fellowship is true for some, but not for others. Everything that Pastor Tucker said about it being a place where you can not only give, but also receive is true for some and not for others. And so open to interpretation. But what should the church be? I lean on the words of Jesus in Matthew 6. Jesus says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And when I think about that passage of scripture in terms of the church, there is a way that it is and a way that it should be. The world as it is, the world as it should be. When I think about the church as it is, thy kingdom come on earth. But then as it is in heaven, how should it be? And I think in the struggle that we're always working to flip the church from as it is, how it's been interpreted, to the way it should be, the beloved community. And so, yes, a place where we come and we're loved, a place where we come and that there is that ecclesia, there is that fellowship, that koinonia, a place where we come and we give, but we also, when in time of need, we're able to receive, a place where we're supported and a place where we can work out our theology, our belief in God and what we say about God, how we say about God, and still be loved and still be accepted even in the struggle. So for me, that's what church is.
You brought up a really, first of all, thank you guys so much for sort of sharing that sort of philosophy of how it works. And I think, Reverend Dr. Cummings, you mentioned that, you said it very eloquently, there, for some people, it is that place of hurting and place of healing and in place of all those different things. And that is what's so dynamic about the Black church and philanthropy specifically. And so we've thrown out a couple of different terms that I think that sort of somehow some people feel like they're the same. And I'd be interested in seeing how you guys sort of see that and how the church, given the fact that we as a community, African Americans, give our philanthropy dollars and time and energy, we're expecting all three, right? And that's an awesome responsibility for the church. So there's a couple different terms: charity, right? So that concept of helping those who have less than, and then stewardship, we've thrown that out. It's like managing the resources that you have, and then philanthropy being this other thing. I'd like to get your ideas on how do you think those three should be in the ideal, in philanthropy in its wholeness should sort of be. So charity, stewardship, and then philanthropy. What do you see that as being, Pastor Tucker, I'd love to start with you.
Well, for some, they're always going to be used as types of synonyms. But I guess the one I would pull out of there to try to hold on to is this stewardship idea, meaning that if everything I have came from the Creator, then how do I use it to honor the Creator? To be more specific, when you look at charity and even philanthropy, which is different than stewardship, for us, and I tell folk that we're burning the candle on both ends. That's the only way it'll work. So if kids are hungry, yes, we're going to feed them, but we need to exercise as much effort in feeding them to finding out why they're hungry. To do the one is problematic because it just perpetuates a status quo in society that because we're feeding them, that ought to become untenable to the people of God. That, yes, I'm feeding you while I am working as hard to make sure that you don't get hungry anymore. And charity and often philanthropy do just that. They do not, and more often than not, I'm sorry for skipping here, but philanthropy and charity, kind of a Christian kind of church kind of term, philanthropy, this secular kind of phrase or whatever, but they are most equipped to deal with the systemic issues, but they tend to only deal with the symptoms. You know, we celebrate having this big thing of bringing out cans of food and doing this feeding, but that same effort, if it was turned toward policy, if that same effort was turned toward political systems that allow for children to be hungry, then I think transformation starts to happen. But it tends to be, from my perspective, it just tends to be that we create these feel-good places for us. We find human suffering and we sprinkle something on it. But when you depower yourself, you become the suffering one. When you depower yourself, you can internalize that suffering. And suddenly, wherever you are, you start to see, I'm better suited for addressing why kids are hungry. I need to turn my attention to why kids, because I have the social and the political and the economic space. But it's so cool to feed a hungry kid when we all know that there are systems behind every hungry child that guarantees that they're going to be hungry every day. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but as a steward of this life that God has given me, and to jump right on the end of Dr. Cummings, that I'm going to preach it and I will never, ever mention her name, is that dichotomy between on earth as it is in heaven. And if you take that seriously, that's a crazy, crazy thing. I mean, even the Community Foundation could not handle as it is in heaven. Its current structure would collapse as it is in heaven. Your redirection of the vast wealth you have would suddenly turn, and it would almost look like it would turn on itself because it is aligned and it is associated with the empire in a very, very comfortable, complementary type way. But if the Community Foundation says, as it is in heaven, empire has a problem with the Community Foundation now. As it is in heaven, the corporate world has a problem with that. And then even the Community Foundation would have to say, all money ain't good money. And that's just the radicalness of this whole idea about what you give in your life to, this breath that God has breathed into you. What are you doing with that to deal with it as it is in heaven? I can't preach that Sunday, Dr. Judy, because it's Father's Day, but we're going to get that in somewhere. Appreciate that.
I know it is, preacher. I know it is, preacher, and you are preaching our souls happy. I agree with Tucker. One of the things as pastor that I had to do early on was to begin to teach the difference between charity and stewardship. And even with people from the outside who wanted to give to the church, to take those opportunities to teach the difference between charity and stewardship. Going back to that Hebraic term, tzedakah, giving out of a sense of justice, a sense of moral obligation. Yes, I'm going to give because the children are hungry, but I must ask the question, why are they hungry? Why am I having to give? And then to teach, the congregation to ask those questions, to interrogate the reason that we need to continue to give. We one of the passages in New Testament text that people point to is when Jesus is talking to the rich young ruler. What must I do to inherit the kingdom? And Jesus says to him, go and sell all that you have, and give. Well, then the rich young ruler starts backtracking the way many of us do, because the rich young ruler simply did not understand the difference between charity, philanthropy, and stewardship. And what Jesus is calling us to do in my Christian faith and tradition is to a sense of stewardship, managing all of God's creation. And until we're all full, none of us are full. Until we're all free, none of us are free. So from that perspective and that mindset, and this is the second time that Pastor Tucker has said it, all money is not good money. Some money you have to turn away because it does not support the values and the beliefs that you have, and it perpetuates and does damage to that which you are trying to, the wrongs that you're trying to right, the justice that you are seeking to do.
Reverend Cloud, you have any pearls?
Just want to affirm what both my other co-presenters have said, that that whole thing about stewardship. But I also think a component of that is helping some of our people understand that you're not, I want to say this properly. Sometimes we get so much in the recipient mode rather than the giving mode and the stewardship mode, that what we all give is not based on how much we have, but how the percentage or with the heart that we give with. And I know we all have a challenge of speaking on the all money and good money, but then you also recognize as an organization dedicated to fundraising that people like recognition. So you have to recognize your donors, but when you lose your sense of power because you're beholden to that donor, whether it's in the church or the foundation, are you really doing justice to justice or to God's call? Are we really doing what God's called us to do? And so I think stewardship encompasses so much more than just how we give. But to me, stewardship is also, don't tell me you can't give to this and your child got $150 pair of Jordans on. There's some priorities there that need to be looked at. I'm not knocking the shoes or anything else, but I'm saying we do what we want to do a lot of times. And so we have to, some of the stewardship is about education and educating people about what it means to be good stewards of the resources we've been given. And again, I still take it back to accountability and transparency in all those things. But the other thing I want to say, when Pastor Tucker was talking, I thought about, how we've always taken people in. For many, many years, we as Black people did not have the luxury of excluding people. in terms of, you know, whatever differences we had, because we had a system against us. So we had to huddle together. I mean, we had our differences, but we couldn't afford to ostracize people in that same way. And I think today we're feeling like we can do that. And that's concerning to me in terms of supporting the causes that are important. And even in the church, when I see the Black church kind of waffling on some issues or not being all, you know, doing, being supporting issues, I'll say, that impact Black people, then that's concerning to me as well.
May I speak up? And so thank you, Pastor Cloud. So, you know, this is June, this is Gay Pride Month, right? How many Black churches, because we love to say, we've always accepted everybody. You know, everybody is welcome to us as churches. But how many of us this month are going to even bring up any of the injustice issues that happen within that community? How many of us are going to use our bully pulpit to even, you know, to say, you know, there are many gay people who love the Lord, who are good stewards, who want to be a part of the church, fully engaged in the church. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then go back to Pastor Tucker when he said we would go down the street there to get that cup of sugar. We would also have those rent parties too, right? Because when somebody was getting ready to be evicted, when somebody was getting ready to be put out, we pulled our resources together, not because it made us feel good, but because we knew the man was sticking it to them. And we were going to come together with that money to help that family stay in that apartment, stay in that house, so that we could stick it to the man. So that for me is also stewardship.
Just to jump on this discussion, I agree with it. And I'll even go so far as to say that this racial reckoning that this country is dealing with is also part of that. And people can't be allowed to use charity as a way of not addressing these issues that are wrong. I'm not a victim, but this country owes me and it owes my people. That Old Testament term that gets lost in evangelical theology is where we get the word reparations from. Great sin requires great repentance, and this country has not done it. And so when folk speak to me about what I'm not doing, let me just treat me the way white America gets treated. Let me be lazy the way some white, give me that. If that's the norm and the average, then give me that. Don't tell me I have to be twice better. Don't tell me that I need to hold on longer. And so again, that forces us to reconsider what stewardship means. One of my favorite theologians, Abraham Heschel, talks about how religion, if it's not checked, we just create this space for us to normalize these tragedies. And instead of trying to deal with them in a way that will eradicate them, but then repair them. And so Black folk know that Black folk, until this world changes, is our best thing going. Because we will bring our little bit together to be able to keep moving. But while we're doing that, many of us are still saying, to fall back on what Dr. Cummings said, as it is in heaven, which again will require totally different giving paradigms that I think, well, even this budget that just came out in this city, it becomes a moral document also. We have sacred texts. Society has sacred texts. And society needs to be made to live up to its own sacred text. This budget is an expression of what is important for the those in control and the dominant culture here. We're more concerned with police, cages, and courts than we are with individuals who are struggling with housing, food, and the ability to exist in this city. That's a tragedy. That is a tragedy that we get a little bit and we take the little bit and we run back. So I don't ever want to get used to crumbs when I see others putting their hand into a loaf of bread. Yeah, I'm gonna eat the crumbs, but while I'm eating the crumbs, I'm looking at you handling the loaf of bread. Even if I go away to eat those crumbs in peace, I never forgot that it came from a loaf, that there's a whole bag somewhere, and we need to get our hands on that bag.
Thank y'all. Really enjoyed those answers and responses to that. I wanted to ask this question. Beyond just Christ, are there examples of others, whether they be in the Bible as far as biblical characters or people that you've looked up to, influenced, that are here or no longer here, or that are your best example of giving? And I think y'all can hear me now. I know I had some technical different.
Well, I'll go ahead and jump on that. And there are multiple.
You heard me. Good.
There are multiple ones, but I like Nehemiah. The story of Nehemiah, the church is always used to build a church, but it's not about that. And I think it works well for where Black folk in America find themselves. Most scholars believe that the cupbearer was a high position that managed all of the goods. He wasn't the one that was doing the wine tasting, but he ensured that all of the goods, all of the food good, all of the stock that ended up on the king's table was okay. So here's this oppressed person who's really made it to the middle class. If you work in the king's house, you get to eat the king's stuff. So he lives this good life, but then he hears, he actually still cares about where he comes from. And he asks, how is it back in the hood? And he's told that the hood is all tore up. And from his own place of privilege, even in his oppression, he's able to convince the king to allow him to go back and fix the community that he came out of. And when you follow that story, he does not take up the dominant culture's way of being. He gets the king's he gets the governor's allotment that all governors get. But he says, no, I'm not going to eat all that by myself. And he opens his table up. He goes against all those models. And so often for us, when we get a proximity to power, we start to think that we actually have some power. And then we start to act like those who oppress us. So for me, Nehemiah is that great example of even the way he confronts, and the book is not shy on ethnic identity. It identifies Sanballat and Tobiah as Ammonites and Hornites who do not care for Israelites. So it is a race issue. It is a ethnic issue. And Nehemiah shows up strong in that. And he says 4 or 5 times through the book, which has inspired me and often carries me. He says, in some variation, he says, God, remember for my good what I have done for your people. And for me, that's that salvific hope that we want to rest in the I know that I know that I know. But Nehemiah basically says, God, count on my record against my stuff, the stuff I've done for somebody else. Oh, that's just always been so powerful to me. And then that's my hope, because I know I'm jacked up. Lord, remember for my good. I had to do 1 or 2 things for my good. And even the New Testament, that good and faithful servant. You get good and faithful for just getting a few things. Not many. That's my hope.
I can think of a couple of things, and not just in giving, but the totality of it. One would be, of course, the preparation of Joseph, that when he ascended, he was prepared and he helped his own with what he got. I think about that. I think about the widow of Zarephath, which some people may use for the wrong reasons, but that says to me, when I'm faithful and obedience in my giving, that it's going to come back to me and I'm never going to suffer for it. Now that's my hold on to as a Christian. Like I said, I think some people have used that to take advantage of people. But that's what I hold on to in my faith giving. So I'll leave it to Pastor Judy.
Yeah, when I think about this question, I don't think about particularly, I'm not thinking particularly about an individual, but about a church. And in the New Testament, there's this church, the Church of Macedonia. And I love this church because the text says that this church gave out of their poverty. Pastor Tucker brought up the budget, the city's budget, as being their sacred text, and that how this budget shows exactly what they believe in and value. Well, I think that this Church of Macedonia valued stewardship. And out of this church, their sacred text, their budget showed their stewardship. It said that they gave out of their poverty. And I believe that just like with that widow of Zarephath, that when they had given out of their poverty, that God restored back to them more than what they gave. And so that's the text that I look to out of when I think I don't have it, if I will just give. When I am have food in my refrigerator and I know there's someone who does not, if I will just give. When I see a baby crying, if I will just give of my time. When I see people in need, I will just give of my talent. That all that I give, that God will restore when I give out of my poverty.
If I could just add on to Pastor Cloud's, I love that story, the widow at Zarephath. And for me, what it typifies is something that the church has gotten away from, the idea of enough. That for me, we celebrate excess and all this other stuff. But for me, so many folks don't have enough. And she doesn't get excess. She doesn't get abundance, but she gets enough. I mean, and it's almost like if I was in church, it's like, that don't get a shout. The idea of enough rarely gets a shout. It's always in this excess. But enough to me is what starts to create a just society. Enough is what starts to speak and move toward equitable partnerships. Because for me, equity is you get enough, which means some won't get any. And for equity to happen, some have to give up something so that everyone has enough. So I'm gonna have to write that one down. I'm gonna have to revisit that one too. Thank you. I will not mention your name either, Reverend Cloud, just so you know.
So we have a question in the chat. I'm going to let Eric pitch that question. We're going to wrap this up because we know you guys. We first of all want to thank you guys so much for spending the time with us and sharing your knowledge and all the information you have, and really clarifying for people what giving is really about in the Black church. That it's not just, it's not just treasures, right? So it's not always money. It's time, talent, and testimony, and the concept of stewardship and how that's different from charity and how that's different from philanthropy. I hope that people archive this for lessons. It sounds like Pastor Tucker has quite a few lessons that his congregation is going to hear about pretty soon, but everyone can kind of run to those characters in particular. So I'm going to let Eric share that question from our Facebook community, and then allow everyone to kind of walk through that, and then we'll say our thank yous and get you all back to serving, which you guys do really well in the community.
Yeah, Pastor Tucker is saying he don't care about the giving and the play, but he preaching like he is though. I'll pretend with you. This question is about intergenerationality, and I'll throw this out to you all. How do you think the younger and older African American generation in our area can learn from each other during the times we're in now? How can we appreciate the lessons learned from wisdom and experiences of our elders and respect the lessons they've learned?
Let me just say, I think we can, and I've got myself in the older generation, of course, we can encourage young people to say, you're going to make it. Because we've been through hard times, we overcome hard times, to say, keep fighting for justice. As Pastor Davie said, know there's a whole loaf out there, and that you have a right to part of that loaf. So keep fighting for it, but don't give up. Don't give in, but don't give up. So that we have the stuff in us that our people have survived all kinds of atrocities, that our churches have survived. And this is one of the things I think about, that it was a church that started most of our HBCUs, or a great many of them. We started schools, we had hospitals, we had, all kinds, like I said, the burial societies, all these things we did, and we didn't have nothing. Relatively speaking, we did not, but we still did that. So I would encourage our young people to have an appreciation for what the elders have brought, and use that as your foundation to move forward. But I also would say to the elders, don't dismiss what our young people bring to the table. Sometimes we're guilty of not listening to them and dismissing them and saying, oh, you're going too far. They don't care about church. They don't know. They care. We just need to listen with the right ears, I think, and we can learn from each other. So that said, I'll turn it over.
Well, just trying to jot down a couple notes. You asked a huge question, Eric, so I'll just take a small bite from it. The church is not the physical location of the building. And so the church often, as it doesn't do this intergenerational thing well, because we have actually been impacted by the larger society, that we take on these leadership models that we learn in the world that actually perpetuate the ostracization and the marginalization of people and their voice. I've been writing on a piece called Refugees, the Children, the Church Lost, and the Movement for Black Lives. And my contention is that we ought not focus on getting them back. As a church, we ought to go to where they are. And that's not just geography. Some of that's ideology. Some of that is philosophy. Some of that is sociology. We have to go where they are, because I just believe that the love of God and the justice of God is a balm for all of humanity. So that's not over at 3101 Curtis Road. That's in those folk who leave out of there and who are hopefully empowered with this hope that we go to where they are. They have something. We both have something. Even now, even in our city, as we try to build this divide up, we try to build a bridge for this divide. Some of us can't, our hypocrisy won't allow us to sit with the anguish and frustration that our young folks are saying. Not when we got on our church hat, but because they cuss, they disrupt. Well, I don't have a problem with either one of those. When I see Christ in the temple turning over tables, driving folks out who have permission from the authorities to be there, the church has to go where our young people are and sometimes just be with them. Certain terms that I don't like. I don't like the idea of mentors, because mentors is a power driven, and I know I'll get pushed back all day on that, but that also has the nuance that the person who is the mentor has the right answers. And if that's the case, then if the person doesn't, we perpetuate stuff that's already wrong. I prefer journey person, someone who journeys with me, that I'm there, but if we can't let folks live out the expression of the life that God gave them, then I think we err there. So for me, it's meeting them where they are, telling them from a historical perspective what I understand. But I also have lived long enough to see that if you're in proximity with them, when they get in trouble, they will call your name. When they get in trouble, they will ask for your assistance. And so that's going to be the struggle, particularly for the Black church going forward, is are we able to come out of these nice buildings and go to where our kids are, the kids we lost, the kids that we didn't have room for, the kids that we wanted to indoctrinate over against their own imagination that God put in all of us through the creative process, that we got to go get them. And that's not ever going to work. We got to go be with them where they are.
You know, this is a great question. And I am so honored. Just the other day, had a couple of young people reach out to me who are on the front lines of justice to do just this exact thing, to ask about, some wisdom about some certain things. But, when you come to those kinds of conversations, you don't come as the expert. I can give my testimony, I can share with you, but I'm also learning from you. And so, as my colleagues have said, it has to be a two-way kind of a conversation. And then I think that just the way those young people reached out to me, that we reach out to them. As Tucker said, it's time out for the church sitting back waiting on them to come back to the church. They're not coming back. I'm retired. I don't know if I'm going back, but I'm gonna come to Tucker's church because I want to hear those sermons. But no, seriously, I think back to the civil rights movement, and you had the elders, and then you had SNCC. And it was that struggle, but it was a struggle that didn't have to be if we would just humble ourselves and be able to listen and learn from each other. There is a yesterday, there is a today, and there is a tomorrow. And I think just looking at the wisdom of all three of those perspectives will do all of us well.
Well, thank you guys so much. That was, I think, the perfect way to sort of say what's the next thing, right? So we always try to have like, what's next? Like, what do we need to do next? And I think that question sort of said, that's what we need to do next. We need to go where they are, right? We need to sort of have this middle place of where, the church has its piece, but also there's a, kind of meet in the middle, or maybe more to the left, maybe more to the right. We don't know, but everybody has to be willing to move. And I think that's where we're kind of looking at. So we want to thank you guys so much for spending the time with us. We could talk forever, but we know you guys have other things that are going as well. We want to thank our esteemed panel, Reverend Dr. Judy Cummings, retired, and also Reverend Olivia McCloud, the assistant pastor at Berea Baptist Church, as well as Dr. Davie Tucker of the Beach Creek Baptist Church as well. Myself and Eric are forever grateful for your knowledge and your willingness to share as well. I would be remiss in not noting that if anyone wants to look back at the other conversations that we have or relook at this, make sure you subscribe to the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee's Facebook page so you can pull this back up and share it with other people. So share, like, comment. We will be monitoring that to get you some, maybe the next steps that these churches are doing. We also want to thank, and I don't want to be remiss in taking Dr. Faison. He had another appointment, but he allowed us to sort of get him at the beginning. So Pastor Faison, as well, at the Watson Grove Baptist Church, or Missionary Baptist Church. In the background, which you guys don't see, and we want to always give honor to those, we have Kelly Wahlberg, who is running our production over at Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee, and our liaison leader and Audra Cox is really behind this entire production. So we also want to make sure we recognize her, all the congregations that have joined in, for you for coming on today and hearing this information and being active, hopefully being active listeners. That's what we're hoping. Everyone who hears this message today becomes an active listener and takes some of this information and does something with it. So with that, Eric, do you have anything that you want to share as we close out?
I do not. Thank you all for being here. Make sure to go to Give Black, Give Back to our website. Look at all the various organizations that we have and keep on giving. That's what us Black folks do, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
Right, that's true. That's right. BlackGivingBack.com is up and ready to go. If you have stories, share there as well and give funds. Thank you guys again. We appreciate you. Thank you for everyone for coming. And we'll check you out in August, where we're going to have Black Philanthropy Month. It is a national recognition month across the country. And we will be hopefully inviting back maybe some of these guests you may see again to talk about how Black philanthropy and stewardship and charity intersect and how we move this country forward using that platform. Thank you.
Right.
Are we still on?